So, hello and welcome to Product at Scale and our panel discussion. These panels are an opportunity for a in-depth discussion on how to build large-scale products. And I appreciate everyone who's here in the audience and also watching on the live stream. Today's discussion is going to be a focus on the dynamic environment of privacy risk management and compliance and how this is making companies rethink how they evaluate their governance programs while simultaneously trying to drive product innovation. I can't think of a better set of guests to have with me. And let me introduce them. Starting from my far left, Abhishek, Director of Meta Product Risk Foundation. He and his team are automating Meta's approach to risk compliance and making policy risk engineering as efficient as possible for engineers. Jonathan's Director at Meta Core Data and Privacy Infra. He's building products so engineers can do their best work while managing the complex set of global privacy regulations and commitments. Mayank, Director of Privacy Engineering at LinkedIn. He and his team are building a scalable, centralized privacy platform from the ground up, enabling consistent enforcement of data policies across all of LinkedIn's data ecosystem. And Drena, Vice President of Office Product Group at Microsoft. She leads product engineering teams focusing on the critical foundation of privacy, responsible AI, security, along with product growth, empowering teams to innovate with risk compliance in mind. As you see from these bios, there's a lot we can learn from these people. So let's just jump right in. Abhishek, I want you to help me set the stage. Over the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen changes across multiple facets, such as technology innovations in AI, the customer demands, and the rapidly evolving regulatory landscape. All of this has driven companies to reevaluate how they approach privacy and risk. Can you first start defining what is today's baseline expectations for risk management and innovation, and also tell us what this looks like at Meta?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joseph. I think one of the first things that we should probably think about is as Meta, when we think about regulatory complexity, our initial approach was as all things Meta, just how do we solve this with technology, right? And a little bit of a history lesson is probably important here to set additional context. If you go back to 2020, can't believe it's almost 5 years ago now, at that time we decided that we needed to essentially rip the privacy program down to the studs and rebuild it. And when we rebuilt it, I think one of the key things we looked for was how do we build excellent processes in place? How do we hire the right expertise while building the program? And also how do we deploy as much tech as we can to automate things? I think this started paying dividends almost immediately, but there were a ton of lessons learned over the last few years, right? And we sort of baked that into how the program runs today. I think one of the key facets that is probably worth highlighting here is how do we learn from the standard things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis and make sure the program essentially evolves to keep up with risks that are also moving at pace, right? And I think there are a couple of key concepts here to ground us in. One is the idea, in practice, you realize that a lot of the risks that the teams are facing as they're trying to ship quickly are very standard. These are things how do you respect deletion requirements, for example, right? We don't want every product team trying to go and reason about these requirements from scratch. So the idea was how do we make sure that these things are standard, available to everybody in a playbook that doesn't require us to essentially rebuild things from scratch. I think the other key component of the program was what we think of as key controls. And these are standard implementations at the code and infrastructure level as guardrails to make sure that once product teams decide to comply with the requirement, that we know they're abiding by it and they're doing it on a continuous basis. I think what all of this meant was because we were taking sort of the standard stuff off the table for teams, the experts in risk could really focus on the novel risks as much as possible and spend their time focusing on those areas, leaving the rest of the machine to really run itself. I think these are the key facets that I think are baseline requirements, great tech, expertise and human judgment at the right time, and really like marrying all of this with great processes.
Okay. Drena, let me ask you the same question. What's Microsoft's approach to innovation while at the same time managing privacy, risk, and safety?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me. It's great to be back on this campus. Look, the thing that in many ways also pulled me to Microsoft is that Microsoft runs on trust. The trust that we have with our customers, whether they're large enterprises or really consumers, is sort of the biggest asset that we have, and we protect it dearly. And so, when we think about how we approach privacy, security, responsible AI, it's really at the foundational layer. It's the foundational elements that are embedded early in the engineering cycle. Those can look like a few different things. First, automated checks, code scanning, policy enforcement, and integrated into developer workflows. If you think about these elements, really sort of highlight the shift-left approach that we not just sort of execute on, but really it's super foundational. So we think of everything from RAI by design, privacy by design, and it really creates this culture in many ways in terms of just the way people do their work. We also use, if we're getting a little bit tactical, layer defenses. So think, upfront threat modeling, red teaming, platform guardrails, which we also take quite seriously, runtime monitoring, with a lot of human oversight as well. So, in many ways, I think these frameworks and these processes and practices really enable us to make this sort of an early and foundational way of how we do our work. And in many ways, it also doesn't create this environment where you're constantly trading, innovation for compliance, or making it feel like teams feel like this is a burden, a thing that we have to do, because it is built in early into our software lifetime cycle. It just really creates no friction, or it at least removes a lot of the friction from the process.
All right, thank you for that. So, Mayank, what approach is LinkedIn taking for risk management?
I think very much on the same line. I think at least everyone on the stage would agree that privacy and security are no longer the bolt-ons of the development cycle. It has now become a core design principle while developing any software, to the extent that all infrastructure should actually be enforcing all of these policies right from the beginning. So at LinkedIn, our aim is right from the beginning, from data collection, even the creation of a single data set, the usage of that data, and the whole life cycle, even to the deletion of that data. We want to follow these principles where the risk is actually looked at. We follow the principles of shift left. We follow the principles of privacy by design. The other part which is also critical is we have to keep pace with the regulations, and they are evolving at a much faster pace, which probably means that developers cannot go back every time and reevaluate their compliance solutions. So you need some programmatic approaches. Mm-hmm. That's another paradigm which we are bringing in to enforce all of these policies automatically without product having to go back and retinker everything together.
Okay. So we've established a baseline for the rest of this discussion with these foundational topics. So my takeaway so far is that we need to reimagine the approach to privacy and risk, instead to reposition it as a competitive advantage, as opposed to just like a checkbox of things that we need to do. So I want to start back onto my colleagues at Meta to discuss the competitive aspect a bit more. So it seems to come down to how AI is used to kind of drive advantages. Abhishek, coming back to you again. What role do you see AI playing in the evolution of risk management that's going to accelerate product innovation?
Yeah, I think, look, it's hard to escape AI these days, right? Like, it's everywhere. So if you think about at the top of the funnel, we totally expect that AI is going to dramatically increase engineering and product productivity and velocity, right? And I think the number of things that are coming to risk systems and risk experts to be assessed, to be adjudicated on, that's going to start scaling super linearly as well as AI makes the top of the funnel like incredibly productive. I think if we just do not evolve the processes that we have in risk and compliance to essentially like evolve in kind, we are going to absolutely find ourselves like inundated and overrun as a program. So I think one of the key things to think through here is like all of us probably share a risk review process, right? That is essentially meant to look at new changes being designed and discussed by product teams as early as possible rather than asking teams to fill out a form like the day before they have to launch a new product, right? I think the key is to like generate as much context as we can ahead of time. Just to give you a sense of scale, on a monthly basis, we look at approximately 1,400 new requests for features, et cetera, that are going through all of Meta's products pipelines, right? You just cannot keep up with this level of scale unless you automate and use AI in a lot of places. So it's all about, rather than asking teams to fill out forms, like, can you just upload your product spec, and we should be able to extract a lot of the information that we need to risk assess and figure out what standard requirements apply to you, mostly automatically, right? So these things are now live. Also, can we essentially offer you diffs while you're trying to land your changes that automatically adopt the controls that I just talked about, rather than asking you to then take another week to like comply with the change or the requirement by writing additional code. Like I think all of these things essentially then allow the experts to essentially focus on the novel risks. And I think this is how a lot of the product innovation, I think Drena had a great point about like we do not want to trade off like innovation for compliance constantly, and this is a way to basically avoid doing that.
Okay, I want to follow up on this comment about guardrails and unpack that a bit. And I want to get Jonathan's thoughts on this. Jonathan, your team owns core data, and you're also responsible for applying AI into the risk program. So I'm sure there are challenges to ensuring the code base is maintains reliable for product launches while supporting a continuously evolving policy landscape. So what guardrails are you establishing to ensure that AI and automation are working the way they should?
Well, first of all, thanks, Joseph, for having me here, and pretty excited to be on stage with you all. Our companies have been working pretty closely together over the years to advance the state of the art for privacy engineering. So I'm pretty delighted to be on stage with you all. As you mentioned, I think earlier, there's a massive number of complex privacy requirements that Meta must meet continuously. And as product engineers, you can't possibly remember all those rules and regulations. So at Meta, over the past several years, we built a platform called PAI, Privacy Aware Infra, that does just that for you. It's been a project we've done for years now that creates transparency in our data, in our system, and how the data move across those systems. And we also offer possibility to create verifiable safeguards and controls to meet some of the most complex privacy requirements. And we have an entire series of engineering blog posts about it. If you want to check it out, the keywords is purpose limitation at Meta.
Nice blog.
But essentially, PAI is the infra foundation of the risk management program and system that Abhishek talked about. At a very high level with PAI, you can create privacy rules that we embed in the code base, and we propagate it all the way down in infra. So it's durable. So product teams can focus on innovating, essentially. So at Meta, when there's a major privacy initiative going on, we can deploy it across the entire code base almost seamlessly so that you product developers can focus on building products instead of being privacy experts, because we automate all that for you. In areas where we don't automate all, when we need human in the loop, we use AI to actually accelerate your work. So for example, we'll use AI to create annotation for your data, for example, and suggest it. Or we will use AI to generate massive code changes if you want to deploy a commitment across the code base. So all these things are in place so that we can really maximize your velocity as developers, but do it in a safe manner.
So, Drena, how is your team at Microsoft addressing this point?
Yeah, it's a great question. For us, guardrails also a critical sort of strategy and approach. And as I mentioned before, it's a bit of a layered, defense strategy. Starting with robust input validation, prompt filtering to mitigate risks like, prompt injection, excessive model agency, which we see often. These technical safeguards are complemented with continuous monitoring of model outputs, automated detection of suspicious patterns, and then regular audits done by our teams, to ensure that the systems behave as needed and as expected. We also really prioritize things like runtime observability and feedback, feedback loop, to generate, the right sort of platform and ability for our engineering teams to quickly identify and respond to such risks and such flags that show up. This is especially important, as we all know, with large language models, where the evolution is happening incredibly rapidly, and with that comes sort of a set of risks that it's hard to contain, and so you have to be super prepared. And going back to my earlier point about shifting left, right, that really helps us almost like get ahead of it. So we take that quite seriously.
All right. So it's been good to hear from everyone on how AI and automation is driving privacy and risk innovation. I want to transition a bit now to talk about what that means for developing new and novel product experiences, those 0 to 1 projects. And I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper here. So I'm going to start again with Drena at Microsoft. As you mentioned earlier, privacy, risk management are core to what you're doing at Microsoft. In particular, how does responsible AI by design and AI safety look like at Microsoft? And can you share an example of how that works?
Yeah. And I think I've touched upon this now a couple of times, but, for us, we see responsible AI evolving truly from principles to practice, right? Where safety, privacy, trust, and responsible AI are not just aspirational, but really measurable things. We simply wouldn't feel good, right, if that wasn't the case. But we are investing in a number of scalable, systems, starting with evals, since you talked about an example. For us, evals allow us to truly test, AI systems, ensuring that the benchmarks that our product teams establish, are essentially hitting the expectations that we as product makers, but essentially our customers, which is who we're building for, they hit those marks. And, in many ways, they protect against the various adversarial sort of scenarios, including misuse, prompt injection, like I mentioned, and so forth. If we talk specifically about the area where I'm in, for example, in PowerPoint or Excel, we're seeing teams, take a very robust approach to evals. It is, in many ways, how we're accomplishing this. And I know that's, standard practice now when it comes to product teams. But that's a good example for us.
All right, thanks. So a similar question to you, Mayank. What does responsible AI by design look like at LinkedIn?
So let me start from the fact that it's an interesting time. While the privacy engineering practices are changing because of AI adoption, at the same time, AI is changing how privacy engineering practices are created. So it's a bi-directional change which is happening. At LinkedIn, responsible AI, we base that into multiple layers. The foundational part of any AI model or training of the AI models in any of the data access is based on data management. From the fact that you are creating a data, to an accessing a data, to a catalog of the data, to classification of the data, to figure out in what cases what will be used, to the point Jonathan was sharing around the purpose aware infrastructure, those are very critical aspects of the foundations to be ready before responsible AI practices can be put on top of it. Within responsible AI, we are looking at the standard practices like benchmarking, red teaming, stress testing. So essentially, we are forming a closed loop whenever any feature is launched on platform. So we are looking at the safety, we measure how that safety is looking like, and then continuously iterate on those safety measures of those things. So essentially, it's a very layered approach. There is no one answer to the responsible AI part, but I think it starts from the base set of where the data resides to data management practices to higher level practices of responsible AIs on top of it.
Yeah, if I may just add something, for us, we really think of a lot of the elements that you mentioned almost like a flywheel effect. Like you can't just rely on one thing. It has to be multiple components working together, maybe fueling the flywheel, so as to get that level of comfort that we're looking for.
All right, thank you. So now let me circle back to Meta. So Abhishek, I'll start with you, and then Jordan, I'll follow up with you. Abhishek, as I understand, you guys have enabled some new risk management products for your team, and they're enabled by AI with automation. Can you expand on that work a bit?
Yeah, one of the things that we're super excited about right now is, look, a classic sort of risk management program is obviously geared towards making sure there's sufficient oversight and monitoring built in so that the things we expect to be happening, we make sure that they are happening, right? But obviously doing that in a brute force way is not going to scale, right? So we realized we were collecting all this data about SEVs happening, which is some fault in the system that happens. We do a full root cause analysis. That we have all these privacy policies and risk policies now in a mature state. It was how do we actually go beyond just standard testing? So one of the ideas was can we take all this data and then simulate proximal faults that are not the exact fault that we saw, because we'll obviously mitigate the thing we saw that failed last week, but how do we essentially generate a suite of tests that are slightly off, but generated by a machine learning model. So now what we started doing is we essentially started feeding all this data, started generating a bunch of unit tests across the code base. So we call this automated compliance hardening because you're really hardening the code base, not just from the faults that but all the similar fault types. This obviously started picking up steam. We started essentially applying this at scale at meta scale. But then we said, why not go a little bit further? Why not, while you're trying to ship code and land code, at that time, can we detect is there a privacy fault in your code? And the gold standard isn't just to tell you that hey, I think something might be wrong here. Can you take a look? I think it's much more if you've tried to land code, a failing unit test is sort of the gold standard for hey, I need to fix something here, right? And so what we've started seeing now is LLMs being able to generate very targeted but failing unit tests to point out the exact fault that your code has so you can fix it before the code lands.
That's right.
And now we are averaging close to 1 to 2 SEVs prevented each week. And we've just published a blog post on this and published some research as well. So I encourage you guys to take a look at it. But that's one example of actually keeping up with the times with AI.
Jonathan?
Yeah, so we just did a presentation on how we use PI in novel ways to help protect GenAI features. You guys can check it out. We also have a blog post that just came out today about it if you want to check it out. And I do agree, the importance of emphasis on talking about the benefits of using AI for the risk space. There are many examples, such examples upstream, like Abhishek mentioned. There are also the example when we say roll out major privacy initiative across the company. There's this huge amount of very complex stack traces that we have to analyze. Massive amount of code we have to review. And models are obviously extremely good at this compared to humans. So we use it to accelerate our work and minimize our mistakes. In fact, a lot of this work would not really be practical if we didn't use AI to do it and assist our privacy experts, essentially. Having said that, when we introduce new technology like this in GenAI, we introduce new product decisions to be made. And these decisions needs to be made by experts, judge. And this is part of the risk management program that Abhishek highlighted earlier, and the risk flywheel, when we have novel risk, introduce new requirements, requiring us to evolve our technologies, essentially.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. This is a great segue into my final topic today. We've looked at some key aspects of AI and automation technologies that streamline risk management and how to create those trusted product experience. So now I really want to kind of look forward to see what's coming next. So given that AI is moving fast and it's evolving, it's changing even today, I want to understand like how product teams have to face these new types of product decisions that come up because of AI. So Abhishek, first, can you tell me about the expert-led approach and how you think this is actually provides greater consistency of data compared to a purely AI system?
Yeah, I think that's a hot topic right now, and I think a very important one. I think building automated and AI-powered risk systems, if anything, allows the human judgment and the expertise in risk management to really shine, right? And the way we see it play out is because we're taking a lot of the cognitive overhead from the system for standard requirements, because they're automated now, the systems are able to actually highlight and point out when we detect novel risk, right? And with the advent of AI, like in our products, like that novel risk is obviously going to go up, right? Where we have to reason about new classes of risk that we need to manage. So I think that's where we see a lot of the consistency play out. And not only do we want to standardize the things that are established risks and how do we mitigate those risks, we also want to make sure that the systems are smart enough to know their limitations so they can actually call on the human expert at the right time. Right? And that's an important concept, and we are working through it. And the other piece that I think is like the flywheel concept is super important. Once you detect that there's novel risk and a bunch of human experts actually then come up with ways of mitigating that risk and managing it, we want to make sure those learnings feed back into the system so that the next time we detect something similar, we are not sort of reinventing the wheel, so to say. So we can actually rely on that judgment that's already been codified into the system, so make sure that things move faster the next time.
Okay. Drena, what are your next steps to scaling safety with AI?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Abhishek has said, the way we think about scaling, it's really about building it inside the infrastructure, not just the governance piece. So this means, building system that makes safety, and compliance part of the default engineering, systems, process, and practice. I mentioned a few different examples, previously around red teaming and so forth. But for us, the experience has to be so deeply embedded into the process that it almost feels, natural, right? We really don't want to do rework. We do not want to, the product teams and engineering teams to have to deal with this later in the life cycle. And so for us, we're really thinking about, how do we move this front and center and make it truly a part of how we do. Going back to just the principles, right? And I started my first maybe answer, but Microsoft runs on trust, right? We do not trade innovation for velocity, but velocity is really important. And so being able to really build this in our product making is just absolutely critical. And so that comes through in our tooling, in our processes, practices, in our review processes as well. We talk a lot about how do we accelerate, how can we enable and maybe almost like unlock product teams so as, this doesn't become, a thing that they have to do. So really, really designing with our product makers in mind.
Okay. So, and for you, Mayak?
Yeah. So, where we have seen is AI works pretty well with when there is a lot of data involved, there is a decision making on those things. We have gotten a lot of success with things like data classification, even implementing some of the monitoring of these things, and even detecting some of those violations automatically. I still feel AI has not yet in a state where it can understand the nuances of regulations, for example. What's the right consent, and also like in sometimes on whether this is a legitimate difference versus it's a discrimination kind of thing. So an expert in the loop is needed for taking those right decisions. There are these tricky things which we have seen when we have built in a lot of automation. Is one of those things is automation bias. If my work is getting reduced from days to seconds, will I think a lot if I get a notification of OK or cancel? Maybe not. But it can lead to some other violations and other consequences of those things. And similarly, there are things like agency limitation. If everything is automated, are we challenging that system enough or not? So I think we are seeing some of those trade-offs, which the systems will have to evolve and will have to put those options in a different manner to the end users. So I feel it's going to be a combination of the two, where we use the power of AI for driving automation, making analysis, but at the same point of time, the human will be in the loop to have the governance solution around it.
All right, thank you. All right, so we've come to the end of our talk, and I know I've been enlightened. I want to thank our panelists, Abhishek, Jonathan, Mayak, and Drena, for this really engaging and thoughtful discussion. We've heard from everybody here about how companies are working to harness the power of AI and automation to manage compliance and risk management efficiently to accelerate product innovation. These approaches ultimately deliver faster, safer, more trusted experiences for the user, and that's the intent. And finally, I also want to thank our audience for listening to us and accepting what we want to share with you, and for those watching on the live stream. So please, everyone, join me in giving our panelists a round of applause and enjoy the rest of Product at Scale.